Mr. Jeremy Millian from Amadeus has an extensive background in the airline industry. He's a veteran with over 20 years of experience. He has expertise in new route forecasting, flight schedule optimization, schedule feasibility testing, pricing and inventory strategy. Uh, his airline tenure has included work in operations, scheduling, network planning, pricing, revenue management, and he's been with carriers like Swiss Air Group, Continental Airlines, United, and Delta. He also has experience from the airline IT vendor side, and he currently serves as the director of global sales for the Sky Suite, which is Amadeus's suite of network planning and scheduling tools. Jeremy, I will give you the floor.
Thank you, Steve. Appreciate it. And hello, everybody. As Steve said, I'm Director of Airline Solutions for Amadeus, specifically targeting the network planning and scheduling arena. And as Steve mentioned, this has been an extremely, obviously, impactful pandemic. And it's like nothing we've ever seen. We've had sort of things hit us from the health side on the airline side, but it's been more regionalistic, like SARS and even some of the swine flu. And what we find ourselves is we find ourselves having a lot of times more questions than we do answers. And so hopefully what we're going to do today is try to address some of these questions that we at Amadeus have been receiving from airlines all over the world. And you'll see there's a few examples up here on the screen right now. And what's really been facing us even more so is just that it's just not limited to the airline industry. Because this is global in nature and it's affecting every industry, obviously it is affecting the demand, and that's it's just a domino effect across the whole spectrum, if you will. So, like I said, we're going to try to address a few of these questions today, and we'll go ahead and go to the next slide here, Steve. Okay, so we're talking network planning and scheduling, and when we talk about network planning and scheduling, we think of this is what defines the airline's revenue potential. We think of it as the heartbeat of the airline, and really, in essence, it is the product that the airline has. Now, when people think of product, they'll think of, okay, am I buying a first class seat? Am I an economy seat? Am I buying onboard meals, or do they have in-flight entertainment? And these are definitely part of the airline's overall product offering to the customer. However, at the end of the day, you're buying a ticket to get from point A to point B. And that is a schedule. And how the airlines design their network and offer that schedule is what is actually bringing you to them in the first place. And then your other factors such as pricing, availability, things of this nature. But when we think of the network planning and scheduling area, we sort of focus on these sort of 5 pillars that you see on the screen now. And I'll focus on the first part and the first 3 in the middle. And the first one being the network design. So how is the airline going to serve their customers? And this could be, an airline that wants to serve point to point. So they want to serve, directly to each city nonstop. Or maybe they're going to have a hub where they'll bring passengers in and connect to multiple destinations and send them out. Or maybe they'll do some level of a hybrid. And then what type of network are they going to have? Are they going to be focusing as an ultra low cost carrier? Are they going to be a full service carrier? So these all are things that get factored in when they're designing their network. And then part of that design are the 2 pieces that you see below. That's the fleet and the timing optimization. So once you have a schedule in place, your expensive assets of your aircraft have to be deployed properly. And you want to best match capacity to demand. And that's even more important in this environment that we're in. But then on top of that, you have the timing of the flights. So what time we offer the flight is going to decide the attractiveness for you, the consumer, on when you're going to want to fly. So the optimization of these pieces are all sort of part of the core tenets that make up the key pieces of the schedule. However, an airline that's building this network can't do this in a vacuum. So that's why you see on the left-hand side, the competitive effects. So we need to understand what is the impact to the competition as we make changes, and potentially vice versa. As they make changes, how is it going to impact us? And this is even more so important because of the fact that the competitive landscape has completely changed. So not every airline is at full strength again. Some airlines are not flying at all. Some airlines are flying more. So, and it's changing every day. And so as a result of this, the competitive piece is extremely important. And then that leads us to the final sort of piece, which is on the right-hand side, and we call it schedule robustness. And what this basically is saying is you can come up with the best commercially viable schedule. However, if it isn't operationally robust and can actually be flown and operated, then you're never going to see that revenue potential anyway. What I mean by this is if you have a disruption, if there's a bad thunderstorm or bad air traffic, delays, how does that impact your schedule? Is it going to cause it to fall apart? and you're going to have to reaccommodate people, or are you actually able to operate in these types of environments? So these are sort of the 5 pieces that we think of at Amadeus when we start to think of network planning. And again, this is the starting point for the airline and is really what defines the overall revenue potential for the airline. Now, with the pandemic in place, we feel that there's a new approach that's needed to scheduling. And the best way to approach that, in our opinion, is obviously we think of it as technology. Technology is the great leveler of the playing field, as we like to say. Airlines have always been doing more with less. Departments are even shorter and smaller because of the fact that you have maybe fewer personnel because a lot of the airlines have had to unfortunately cut staffing. So you're having that piece of it. Then on top of that, you're having all the other questions and challenges of the normal day-to-day of the data and the competition. So with technology, we think of things of basically having like machine learning and artificial intelligence, having these types of components built into tools to help you basically come up to decisions and be smarter and make better decisions faster. But as part of that, though, it's not just tools. So it also is processes. So a lot of the same legacy processes that have been in place need to be revisited and basically approached, because what used to work 2 years ago and 3 years ago can't be applied in today's environment. So as a result, like I said, we think there should be a new approach. We'll go to the next slide, please. So let's start with the process, please. And so if you think about it, the traditional approach that airlines usually would use is they would take a look at either last month's or last season's schedule. And let's take an example of this coming summer. They would say, let's look at last summer, and we'll use that as a starting point for our schedule. Problem is, last summer's schedule is not relevant anymore because some airlines weren't flying at all. And if they were flying, maybe they're flying at a skeleton capacity. And then who knows what they're going to be flying this coming summer? It could be, a difference of, 50 to 100% difference in terms of capacity. So you can't use hey, we'll use last summer as a proxy, or we'll even use 2019 because it's not relevant anymore. But what they would do is they would take that schedule and then start and say, okay, I'm going to use that as a starting point, as a shell, if you will, and then I'm going to make micro changes. Well, you also had a lot of time to basically go through this whole process and evaluate, well, what if I want to iterate with my other departments that are within the airline and get their feedback? And you had time to basically get this and then publish the schedule. However, that time is not necessarily relevant anymore in terms of being able to have it as a luxury. So you would take it, you publish the schedule, and it goes through the process of going through the revenue management piece where your RM colleagues are managing the inventory, and then of course the schedule's flown. That time cycle, unfortunately, has been compressed dramatically these days. So we feel there should be a modern approach. And by that, we think that you should have clean sheet scheduling. So being able to build a schedule from scratch, being able to build schedules faster so you can have different scenarios to basically evaluate and put in place. Having the ability to create operational friendly schedules, bringing the operational estimates and environments much sooner into the planning process as opposed to waiting for operational feedback. This would reduce obviously the number of iterations required, and obviously gives you more flexibility and time to basically get the schedule out. And then we'll talk about some additional components of once the schedule's open and actually out there for sale with respect to adapt optimization and what we call close-in refleeting, as you get more in tune, if you will, with the operating groups and approach closer to the day of departure. So again, we feel that a modern approach needs to be built, and one of those key tenets is what we said is clean sheet scheduling. And it sounds like it might be something like from science fiction, but it's actually something that exists today and that we actually have tools that can do. And just to kind of reiterate what it is it's literally taking a clean sheet. So you're not taking a previous season schedule. You're taking what are the key pieces of what you want for your network. Like, I want to fly 5 times a day here. I want to fly 3 times a week to this destination. How many aircraft I have. My operational rules, and then your commercial elements, your fares and things of this nature, as well as some of the demand numbers. And then the tool is actually building the schedule. So instead of you manually trying to build and piece and time a schedule and do it, the tool is doing that. And it's solving the timing, the routing, and the fleeting simultaneously. So it's taking all of these elements, if you will, think of it as ingredients of a cake, mixing it up, putting it into an oven, and then out comes a cake. So instead of basically, you trying to manually do this, what if you had something where you could hit a button and it could do it for you? And SkyMax, which is our optimization tool, is built specifically for this. It wasn't designed for a pandemic, but it lends itself quite nicely given the fact that a lot of airlines are having to actually build their schedules completely from scratch because they're going from not flying anymore to all of a sudden deploying 20, 30, 40 aircraft, whatever the case may be. And this allows them to come up with multiple flexible analyses to basically evaluate what's going to be the best for them given the current competitive environment and situation. Now, once we have that schedule in place, we'll go ahead and go to the next slide. The next piece that we have to deal with is when the, Steve, if you could advance. Thank you. So now that we've got this schedule in place and we've built this sort of clean sheet, now the question is well, what happens when the environment's changing? So, hey, what happens if borders are closing or borders are opening? And we can capitalize on this. Well, we've got a schedule in place. We don't want to go back and rebuild again, although we could, because we don't really have the time and luxury to do that. But we also don't want to unravel all this great schedule that we just built that we think is commercially viable. So how do we do something that basically matches the both of those? Basically takes in these changes to the environment, but actually keeps most of our schedule, if you will, as consistent as possible. Now you can do this manually, and even with some of the tools that are out there in the marketplace today, it can help, but it's still very time consuming and very painful. And again, as we know, things change rapidly. So countries could say, hey, we are closing in 2 weeks. You have 2 weeks to get your schedule in order. Or, hey, FYI, starting the 1st of March, we're going to be open for business. And so you only have a finite amount of time to get that schedule redone and open for sale so that you can actually try to capitalize on this new opportunity for demand. We call this adapt optimization. So having a tool to basically say, hey, I'm going to provide you these changes and let the tool basically come up with an optimization while trying to be consistent. This is what's going to help basically an airline basically position themselves better as these changes come forward, because the person that can ask and react fastest is going to be the one that can react and get the demand better and faster. Now, the last piece of sort of the puzzle here is if we get closer in, now we're getting closer to the day of departure. Now we're starting to liaise more with revenue management. And we've always had that interaction with the RM department. You know, having worked on both sides of that fence, I've had scheduling come to request things from me and RM, and me and RM have to request things from scheduling. But how do we basically help meld those two and automate that and use tools to help us, come through these processes? And the first one we have is what we call close-in refleeting. And close-in refleeting, as the name implies, is basically redeploying your capacity to match it to the demand. So if you look at the bottom of the screen, I have two sort of examples. I have a yellow and a red one, basically that shows, hey, as I change in the demand from RM, I have the ability to basically capitalize, redeploy my aircraft, and then now put a cheaper aircraft on a route that doesn't have the demand and put a higher yielding aircraft on potentially a bigger route where I can actually capture this. So again, these are all the various steps that we're walking through, from basically clean sheet to adapt optimization to a close-in refleeting piece where you're actually really liaising more with revenue manager data closer in and basically allowing airlines to basically maximize the revenue potential given the current circumstances that are out there. And with that, I'll sort of close the door on sort of the network planning side, and I'll pass the floor back over to Steve so that our next presenter can present.